evening. Welcome to ATV. I'm Leyna Cotran, your host for this evening. With me is Tawfic Halaby, the eldest of 5 children who was born in Kuwait to a Palestinian father and American mother. He participated in musicals and played the trumpet while attending expatriate British and American schools in Saudi Arabia. Tawfic is a member of the World Harmony Ensemble and the World Harmony Chorus, and traveled to Cuba with the chorus of a cultural exchange that culminated in an international choral festival in Santiago de Cuba. He has resided in the Bay Area for 18 years and earns a living as a civil engineer. Tawfic, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Leyna.
Tell me about your life, where you grew up, and where your parents are from. We want to hear all about your childhood.
Sure. My mother was born in the United States. She's not Arab. She was born in Chicago. Her mom was Lithuanian, born to Lithuanian immigrants, and her father was born in Sweden and came to the United States as a child. My mother was raised in Chicago and later moved to the Middle East. My father was born in Ramle. His family had been there for many generations, and in 1948 his family was forced out of Palestine and they went to Amman, Jordan. My father grew up in Jordan, and then as a young man came to the United States as an international exchange student and studied at Southern Illinois University, and that's where my parents met, Southern Illinois University. I was born in Kuwait. I had a lot of family members in Kuwait that had gotten jobs there in the 1950s and the 1960s, and I ended up growing up in Saudi Arabia. My father got a job in Saudi Arabia, and he was there for many years. I have 4 younger siblings. At home we spoke English, but I did learn some Arabic along the way from kids in the neighborhood and from my Palestinian relatives, even though they all spoke English. My Palestinian relatives always spoke Arabic at home, so that's how I learned Arabic. While I was growing up, it was very interesting. It was very normal for me because that's all I knew. I grew up in the expatriate community in Saudi Arabia. So I'm one of those kids who attended the British schools and the American schools with all the other foreigners. My classmates were from all over the world, literally. I recall having friends and classmates from South America, from Europe, from Northern Africa, various parts of Asia, and other Arabs and Arab Americans, just like me. And it felt very normal. That's all I knew. I do recall switching from the British school to the American school. It was really traumatic. So we had great rivalries. But nevertheless, I switched, much to my chagrin. My parents knew that I would end up in the United States, so I switched to the American schools. And I did not, I'm thinking now back on those years, I remember one time someone asked me where I was from. I was 12 years old, and I did not know how to answer that question.
Right.
Where are you from? I was taken aback. I was like, how do I explain where I'm from, given this somewhat convoluted family history? So I said I'm from Chicago. It was a relief just to say somewhere,
Right.
and no questions asked.
Yeah.
If I would have tried to say I'm Palestinian, American, born in Kuwait, raised in Saudi Arabia, etc., it might have been a little difficult. So that's something that sticks out from my childhood. I think I grew up in a pretty idyllic situation. My father always had a job, and we went to these schools with all the foreigners, and we had a good education. And I remember when I moved to the United States, people would always ask me what was it like living in that country, living in Saudi Arabia, growing up there. It was kind of hard to describe because that's the only thing I really experienced. It was normal for me, it was normal for the kids that I knew at school and for our neighbors. So that's what I remember about my childhood.
And so with your mom being American and your father being Arab, what was that like at home? How did she help, understand that culture? What was that like for her?
Yeah, that's a good question. My mother moved to Kuwait when she was very young. She just finished college, married my dad, and they moved to Kuwait. And she lived with my Palestinian relatives in the same flat. And she learned a little bit of Arabic. She could get by with Arabic. And she learned about the culture and the food and how the families communicate. And so I applaud my mother. That was very brave for a young 22, 23-year-old in the early 70s to move to a country like Kuwait. And growing up, we always had both cultures. I distinctly recall growing up, we ate a lot of Arabic food, and we had a lot of friends that were Arabs. As you know, there's a lot of Arabs working in Saudi Arabia that are not Saudis. Palestinians, Lebanese, Syrians, Jordanians, Egyptians. Those are the folks that I grew up around. And they always spoke in Arabic to me, and I always understood what they were saying. And I would answer as much as I could in Arabic. And I never had an issue with was I Arab or was I American or was I both. It just wasn't an issue. We were just the Halabys, and that's all I knew, you know. And you know, now as an adult, I learn more about culture and things like that. I see that maybe I was a little bit lucky that I didn't have any pressure to try to figure out who I was.
It's wonderful.
At such a young age. Yeah.
It's wonderful. So how did you end up in the Bay Area?
Well, I ended up in the Bay Area after college, but there's a little bit of a story before college that maybe I can go into.
Please.
Okay. So at the time that I was in Saudi Arabia growing up, they had schools for foreigners up until 9th grade. And after 9th grade, I had to leave Saudi Arabia in order to continue high school. So at the time, it was very popular for the expatriate kids in Saudi Arabia to go off to boarding school. Some would go to the east coast of the United States to the famous prep schools. And some would leave and go live with relatives, let's say in Jordan or the United States. And I chose to go to boarding school in Europe. I visited a few, and I really liked the one that I saw in Athens, Greece. So I went there. And I went to school there for 3 years, the American Community Schools of Athens, Greece. It was a regular day school with a boarding section. And as it happens, when I moved there, I reconnected with my Arab roots. And that's why it's an important part of my story. I had classmates that were Lebanese and Palestinian. And I would visit with them on the weekends, and their moms would cook Arabic food. They would spoil me. They'd ask me, "What's your favorite food?" And I'd tell them, and they'd make it for me. And I got an ear for Arabic again. There was a little bit of time in my junior high years where I lost some of my Arabic.
Sure.
And but I was happy, fortunate that I could reconnect with my Arabic culture and Arabic friends, and I'm still friends with them today. This is many years later.
Yep.
So after high school, I knew I was going to go to the United States for college. So I went to study engineering. My father had been in the construction and petrochemical industry in Saudi Arabia for many years, and he had encouraged me to go into engineering. And I did well as a youngster in maths and sciences. So it was natural for me to then think about a technical career and to take my father's advice and go into engineering. So I studied engineering. And then when I finished college, I had a couple of interviews and I had a couple of job offers. One was in Houston and one was in the Bay Area. So I thought about my opportunities, and I thought I would have a better cultural fit in the Bay Area. And so I came here, and I've been here ever since.
And your parents, they are where now?
My parents reside in Chicago, in the suburbs. My father has since retired, and they live in the Chicago suburbs. And my mother's extended family is still in that area, in the suburbs of Chicago.
Wonderful. What a really lovely story. I wanted to start by discussing music in your life. So how did this come about for you, since it's so vastly different from what you do for a living as a civil engineer?
Yes. I credit my mother,
yes.
And I'm very grateful to my mother. My mother had a passion for music in her youth. She had played the violin for many years. And I remember growing up, we always had music in the household. music playing in the background. Could be Arabic music or otherwise. And then when I got to third grade, my parents told me I had to pick a musical instrument
Right.
and join the school band. So I chose the trumpet.
Okay.
I started playing the trumpet in third grade.
Wow.
And when I went to junior high, I had a very strong music program. So I continued playing the trumpet through junior high. And then when I went to high school in Greece, unfortunately at the time, the music program was a little bit weak. And on top of that, I got braces. And it was very difficult to play the trumpet with braces. So I got a little discouraged. And I stopped playing in 10th grade. But my love for music never went away. I always listened to music. In those days, I used to listen to hard rock and heavy metal. That was in vogue in the 80s. And when I went to college, I did not participate in any music and I did not study music. But I always had a fondness for singing. And after I moved to the Bay Area, a friend of mine invited me to a choral performance. And I liked it so much that subsequent to that performance, I joined that choir. It's the World Harmony Chorus, and I'm still in that choir. The World Harmony Chorus has a branch in Mountain View, a branch in Oakland, and that's the branch that I belong to because I live in the East Bay, and there's a new branch in Santa Cruz. So that is how I got into music. I did get a really unique opportunity to travel with my chorus for an international choral festival in Cuba. We went for 3 weeks. We actually had a tour, a bus tour of Cuba, starting in La Habana, going all the way to Santiago de Cuba, with various cultural exchanges. And then in Santiago de Cuba is when we participated in the International Choral Festival. And that was an experience that will be with me for the rest of my life.
It's wonderful.
Yeah.
And so what else about music? How else do you integrate it today? I understand you're part of a really big relief effort, volunteer effort, and we'd love to hear all about that.
Yes. So my choral director had traveled to Bosnia 2 years ago in 2015 to commemorate the 20-year anniversary of the war in Bosnia. And around the same time, here in the United States, we started hearing about the European refugee crisis. And something that will also stick with me is the image of a child, Alan Kurdi, his body washed up on the shores in Turkey. And I think for me that was a wake-up call that something was really, really wrong. Well, here in the United States, we're protected from the refugee crisis that's going on in Europe and the Middle East. And subsequent to that event, my choral director put together a group of people here in the Bay Area, just a few of us, and to travel to France to work at a refugee camp. She had done some research to find an appropriate camp for us to go to put together a music program. And she found the Calais jungle at the time was a refugee camp, an unofficial refugee camp in Calais, which is in northern France, across the English Channel from Dover. They have the channel is located over there, and they have ferries then that travel across the channel between France and England. And over a period of about 18 or 20 years, refugees had traveled to Calais trying to get into the UK.
And these are refugees from all over?
From all over.
Right.
When we went to Calais in the summer of 2016, we had a presence in the jungle for many weeks, 6 weeks, doing various programs. I personally went for a period of 2 weeks, and I also went at the same time with a group of people. There were 6 of us, myself, 2 choristers, 2 of my siblings,
Oh, wow.
and my choral director. And we were inside the camp for a couple of weeks, doing a music program with young adults and youth. So I would say in the age range of 16 to 18 would be the youth, and the 18 to 25 would be the young adults.
Mm-hmm.
So we'd have 2 music classes per day. On a conceptual level, although we were teaching music and singing and doing body percussion, really what we were doing was just showing up to spend time with refugees, to offer some sort of hope that we can have a human connection, even if we're from different countries. We acknowledge you, the refugees, you're going through hard times. You're no different than us. We just understand that your circumstances are such that you were forced out of your country, you had to flee for your life, and you're in this particular situation. Really, that was for us the crux of it. And we express ourselves through music. We're musicians. So there is something to be said for music as a form of therapy. We know it from religion, and we know it from art therapy, and we know it from building community. You know, when I think of music, I think of, let's say, the debke. Mm-hmm. You know, with your brothers and sisters, your cousins, your neighbors, you join hands, and you get into a rhythm together, and you express your joy and your love for your community. This, to me, is the essence of music. We're all in this together. We're a community. So my hope is that whilst in Calais, I was able to do that for a couple of weeks with these refugees. We taught them songs in various languages, a couple of fun African languages, English, Spanish, and then our program culminated in a performance in front of the refugee camp. Right. And it was a lot of fun. It brought a lot of people together. We collaborated with an Iraqi rapper.
Wow.
Yeah, it was very interesting. His story is that he was making music that was speaking out against some, let's say, injustices or corruption in Iraq. And his family was threatened, and he was threatened. So he moved around and hid for a while, and things got heated up, and he had to leave. And we were fortunate enough to hook up with him in this refugee camp and make music with him. Similarly, we made music with a wonderful Sudanese singer who just had an amazing repertoire and an amazing voice of Sudanese pop music. And so we collaborated. We learned a Sudanese song, and we sang it with our choir, with the Sudanese singer and a few other refugees. And we did some of our choral songs as well as part of the performance.
And I know for you, working with refugees, there's a personal connection for you.
Yes, so I am Palestinian American.
Right.
And my father's family was forced out of Palestine in 1948. My father was a child. He grew up in Jordan, and the circumstances were not so great because they did lose everything in Palestine. So for me, living a comfortable life here in the West, I think made it all the more compelling for me to do something. Because I heard stories while I was growing up, you know, losing your homeland, being a refugee, it's traumatic. And I've heard the stories my entire life, you know. We knew a lot of Palestinians growing up, and we all had similar stories. So that stuck with me. I'll never forget that. I'll never forget who I am and where I came from. So I guess in a sense, it's me giving back in a way that I know how to give back, that I'm able to give back.
So if others want to get involved in your group, you know, how can they get involved? Who can they contact?
Oh, well, we do have a blog. Our group is called Expressive Arts Refuge, and our blog website address is earefuge.wordpress.com. And that would be a quick and easy way to get a hold of us.
And so do you have advice for others that want to get into volunteering, particularly in supporting refugees? You know, what would be some feedback that you would give to someone that wants to start on efforts like you have done in your life?
Yes. My advice is really get yourself out of your comfort zone. Go to Turkey, go to Greece, go to France. Go volunteer at a refugee camp. And really that's the only, for me, that's the only way for me to really get out there and do something. I know a lot of people can't travel overseas. So really what I would recommend is get involved locally. You know, we just had a couple of devastating hurricanes do something. Donate time, donate money. Go to Texas, go to Florida, help rebuild. If that's not possible, do something even more local. Go to your animal shelter. Go to your soup kitchen. There are returning soldiers and vets who have PTSD. There are homeless people who need all sorts of help. So there is a way to help. There is a way to get in touch with your own humanity, to connect with other human beings that are in different circumstances. And I think when people really challenge themselves, they find out that there's a whole lot they can do that they never knew about within themselves.
And you had mentioned you had worked with youth and young adults. What was that like for you? How did that affect you?
Yes, I had a similar experience in the summer of 2017. So just to clarify, in the summer of 2016, I traveled to Calais, France. In the summer of 2017, I traveled to Athens, Greece, to do a music program at a refugee camp. And this one was with children. We were able to connect with a Syrian school. That is, a school run by Syrian refugees for Syrian refugee children inside a refugee camp near Athens. The name of the camp is Skaramagas. And we were there for 2 weeks, and we worked with school children, ages roughly 6 to 12. We had 4 classes a day, and again, our program culminated in a performance where we had the children performing in front of the camp residents, their parents and neighbors. And it was truly inspiring. So here's something interesting. During the classes, we found that kids had a lot of difficulty paying attention. So obviously, the conditions were not ideal, having to run away from their home countries. These are mostly Syrian refugees. So a lot of strife back home, cities, towns being attacked, a lot of warfare, being forced out of their homes, fleeing across Turkey, fleeing across Mediterranean, coming into Greece, put in the refugee camps, a lot of trauma. So the behavior was very difficult to deal with.
Right.
I'm not trained to deal with children.
Right.
But nevertheless, they absorbed everything. Somehow, through the chaos, they were able to really sink in and really learn. We taught half a dozen songs, and we also performed, in addition to the songs that we taught, a Greek song and 3 Arabic songs, like a medley of songs. And we brought in some refugee musicians, again, Syrian refugee musicians. We put on this concert. And really it was so rewarding. I can't really talk enough about how rewarding it was to watch the kids participate and get enthusiastic about the performance and really give it their all.
Right.
And it was a lovely experience.
What do you hope they will get out of the experience of having you there?
Well, it's kind of hard to say. I hope that they will realize that there are people all over the world that care about them, that care about their well-being, that want them to have a good life, to succeed in whatever it is that they pursue. In this day and age, it's possible to keep in touch with social media.
Right.
These children were a bit young, as I mentioned, but some of the older musicians that we work with, I'm still in touch with them
Right.
through social media. We're communicating.
Right.
Yeah.
That's good. That's great. And then, so locally, do you do any volunteering locally for anyone here?
Volunteering locally, the extent of my volunteerism is occasionally, like at a Thanksgiving or when there's an event, volunteering to do litter cleanup. I fostered a dog and then adopted the dog. That's a little bit of volunteering. In my capacity as a civil engineer, sometimes I have the opportunity to go into schools to talk about careers. That's really the extent of it, yeah.
And so before we wrap up, I want to ask, again, if someone wants to get involved, they want to, kind of follow the path that you've taken, where would you tell them to go, what to do?
Yes, so Expressive Arts Refuge is the name of the group. And our blog is earefuge.org. wordpress.com.
Okay.
And my name is Tawfic Halaby, and I'm on Facebook, and people can look me up.
Well, Tawfic, thank you so much for joining us. It was a pleasure to hear about your experiences in music and in choir and in all your volunteer efforts. I think, it's wonderful that we have people like you in the world that makes the world a better place. I'm Leyna Cotran. Thank you so much for joining us for ATV. Good night.